So I'm here joined by my colleagues, Laurel McCombs and Karen Osborne. Welcome to you both. Hope you're both doing well. So as usual, we're just going to kind of jump in because we only have a half an hour. So we're going to just get started. So just a reminder to everyone how this works. Please type in any questions that you have either into the Q&A or into the chat, whichever you prefer. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and we'll end promptly in 29 minutes. But we do have a couple of questions that came into us in advance. So I think we'll start with those questions, and then while we're waiting for you all to enter your questions into the chat and into the Q&A. So first question. I'm interested in best practices and examples for creating a corporate partnership program. My goal is to create a program that is tailored to make a single ask for the year, i.e. annual gift, event sponsorship, etc., versus multiple asks throughout the year.
So I thought about this question. Thank you for sending it in advance because it gave us time to think about it. And I think you're asking the wrong question. It is not, there shouldn't be a single program for your corporate relations work, just like you wouldn't have a single program for individual giving. You would treat people in a tiered approach. You would have, major gifts, and you'd have, mid-level gifts, and you'd have smaller gifts, and you wouldn't put them all in, well, this is how we're doing individual giving, period. And that's what you're kind of asking about for corporate. So for example, you might have a donor who likes the multiple asks because it comes out of different pockets and they have to work it in a different way. You might have another one that's annoyed by the multiple asks. So by trying to build a program that's convenient for you is kind of the wrong way to look at it. It's like, what's going to work? What's going to work with these corporations? So your top ones, your top corporations, you would treat just like a major gift donor. You'd have multiple strategies. You'd have multiple pockets that you're trying to raise the money from. You'll have multiple relationships, not a single point relationship, but a strategic relationship. For the sponsor and annual folks who you don't think have potential to do more, then I like your notion of a single, let's try and just do a single ask so that we get all of our sponsorships done early. We know who's going to sponsor. We know long before the event happens who's going to give. That's smart. That's strategic. But make sure you're not lumping corporations that could do more in with that kind of sponsorship annual approach.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think that it is the right approach to be thinking about this, from a partnership. I love she said the word partnership, right? I think that is the right way, and I think that is the right shift from how we have traditionally thought about corporate revenue. I do think that even when we are talking about sponsorship and cause-related marketing and some of those other things, I think we still need to approach it from that perspective of partnership. And one of the things that I would say too is, something that we recommend everybody have both for their individual giving and for their corporate programs is a suite of engagement opportunities. Just what are all of the different ways that someone can be involved with your organization? And I think sometimes we don't apply that to corporate funding. I think sometimes we forget that all of those really great engagement opportunities that we create for individuals can also be applicable to corporations as well. And I think taking that approach to coming up with some of these packages and some of these discussions you're having with your corporate partners really helps, because you're looking bigger. Like, are there volunteer opportunities? Are there single day volunteer opportunities? Are there multi-day? Are there ways to incorporate marketing? Are there ways to incorporate serving on committees and, doing different things for the organization that really do deepen the partnership and move our corporate revenue from being as transactional as it probably traditionally has been to being a little more relational?
Yeah, that's so smart, Laurel. And the one other thing that I would add to that is to remember that employees rate their job satisfaction with their companies higher when the company gives them those volunteer opportunities that Laurel mentioned. So when you're making your case, when you're asking them to be involved, you want to just keep in mind that you're really helping them. You are helping them raise the satisfaction of their employees by offering these engagement opportunities.
All right, thanks, guys. Those are great answers. I would just add very quickly too to this question is that I think a lot of times, and I guess it's the word sponsorship that's catching my ear and my eye, is that we tend to overestimate like the value of what we can provide in terms of marketing for corporations. Like there's real limitations. Like, are you going to spend $10,000 advertising essentially for an event that reaches 200 people, or like how many Facebook ads does that buy? How many, how much time on Google does that buy? So I think to Karen's point and to Laurel's point, thinking more internally, like what value can I give? The value that the corporation gets out of working with you probably has a lot more to do with employee satisfaction than it does sort of being in the outside world, and thinking about that, like what value can you provide to them for their employees? How can you steward them by providing materials that they can use internally as opposed to externally? So something to think about. But we have other questions, so I don't want to stay on this forever. But hopefully that helps. So we have some questions for people from people that are actually on the call. So we'll go to that. So when dealing with a small nonprofit, how do you deal with a board chair who has been the board chair for 20 years? P.S. Hi to Karen. So how do we deal with a board chair that has been board chair for 20 years? Thoughts?
I guess I mean, it's hard because we didn't get a lot of information about what it is we're dealing with other than longevity, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of assumptions I think we can make about what you're implying.
We're trying to think of a graceful way to move this person along to a different role.
Yeah, and I'm sure Karen and Bob have a ton of really great stuff to say about this. I will just say that, I think now is a really great time. I think we have an opportunity right now that I think we haven't always had to have really open and honest conversations with our boards and our volunteers about offering opportunities to new voices, to going out and trying to get new perspectives, new diverse perspectives. I think people are more open to those conversations than maybe they've ever been. And I think that can be a really great way to approach this, right? That it isn't about not valuing the service that somebody's provided, or the perspective or the voice or the leadership that someone's provided already to the organization, but that as we try to reach new audiences and as we try to increase the diversity of voices across the institution, that leadership needs to follow suit. And that, how are we as an institution trying to, from the top down, kind of increase that diversity of voice? And that can be a really nice way to kind of have a conversation just about changing leadership and moving in different directions without making it about a person or about a person's value or the leadership that they provided. So that's just one thought that I have.
And from a governance point of view, I don't know what your position is and how much, are you a vice president or director that you have some more say, but managing up is an important skill. From a governance point of view, you really want term limits. And that's another way to approach it without it being about a person. It's about how can we operate in the best possible way to serve the people that we serve, or to serve the cause that we serve. And term limits are so powerful, especially when they're coupled with post-board service engagement. So you don't lose, because one of the downsides of term limits is that then they're gone and you didn't want that one to leave, you wanted this one to leave. And so making sure you have strong post-board service engagement. And then the third thing is that you have regular conversations with each board member, so that you know where their heart is and what it is that they're struggling with, and what do they like about what they're doing, and what other things would they like to be doing? So, but you'd have to have them with all of them, one, so that it's not just about, as Laurel says, this one person. But 20 years is a very, very long time for somebody to be the chair. And they're keeping, like, what's in it for all the chairs of the subcommittees if they never have an opportunity to be chair?
Yeah, I think I bet if you talk to the other board members that they're probably not particularly engaged, I would think, just because the leadership is kind of taken care of. And so I'll add my answer to it, is just that, you know, and do a plug for consulting and consultants, which it looks like you may be, and it's a great use for a consultant just to say, hey, this isn't really the way you should be doing it. If you don't want to say it, to get a consultant to say it. I mean, I think I speak for Laurel and Karen that, you know, a fair amount of the work that we do is just that, like, here's best practice, here's the consequences for not doing it this way, here's the impact that it may be having on your organization and its effectiveness. And that's a perfectly valid use of a consultant. And I think something that we get used to do all the time, have the tough conversations that, you know, for whatever reason, people don't always want to hear from staff, unfortunately. So let's move on.
I just want to say, sure. I thought it was funny, Sarah popped in the chat, you know, like, I'm surprised they don't have term limits. And I do find that for especially a lot of small organizations that don't have term limits, I think it is still a remnant of this scarcity mentality that we have carried with us in this sector for so long. A lot of organizations that don't have term limits, it's because they're like, we can't lose anybody, right? We have to be able to keep people forever. And I think, again, as we kind of ditch that scarcity mentality, realize that there is abundance, realize that there are people who want to support us, want to be with us in this work, and that we want to, again, increase the diversity of voices that are part of the work that we do. I think that is a big shift, right? Is moving from, no, we can have term limits because there's lots of people to fill these roles. So, you know, I think, again, just a benefit of moving away from a scarcity mindset.
Absolutely. Thanks, Laurel. All right. So we have from an anonymous attendee. Last month, someone asked about successive Zoom meetings. What are your thoughts on phone calls? Can they be as effective as a Zoom meeting or in-person meeting? What do you guys think?
That's my favorite answer to every question is it depends. It depends on the donor, right? I think there are plenty of donors out there who and still blessed. I mean, the great thing about the one really great side effect of the pandemic was its ability to make some people who were not comfortable with technology more comfortable with technology and able to use Zoom. And, people who never would have used Zoom are on Zoom now, but there are still plenty of people who aren't comfortable with it. So if somebody doesn't want to be on Zoom, they don't want to be on Zoom. And if phone is and if they're not comfortable being in person, we got to meet them where they are. So, I mean, I've been talking to plenty of clients who, like it or not, phone is the only option they have. And so they've got to figure out how to make it work. I do get that it's really hard when you can't read body language and see the expression on somebody's face. I mean, that's such a huge thing. I think it's more helpful. I think it also helps when we can be like, oh, let me pop something up on my screen, or let me know. I think, Zoom obviously makes things a little more dynamic than phone, but if that's where people are, you've got to make it work. That's kind of my thought on that.
And making it work, and I think we said this last month, is you've got to still follow the same rubric of what a successful visit looks like. What happens too often, even with Zoom, is we throw out all the things we know about a good in-person visit. Having the 3 reasons for the meeting, having it be about them and not about you, asking strategic questions, listening, having a purpose and a plan for your visit, and how's it going to end? You have a plan for the end and what's going to happen next. Phone can work, Zoom can work, in person can work, but only if you do the right things, that you follow the rubric of what makes a powerful and good visit that advances a relationship.
Yes, excellent answers. I don't know that I have anything to add to that? I think those are good comprehensive answers. So let's
I will. Oh, sorry, Bob. I always do this. I always have like one last thought. I will say, because Karen made me think of something, I will say that I think there's something about the phone that makes us feel more rushed. And so just to kind of piggyback on Karen's point about, beforehand being really clear about how long this is going to take, making sure we've gotten permission to take 30 minutes or, whatever it's going to be, making sure we have an outcome, making sure we get to that outcome. Because I think there is something about not being able to see people and not being able to get their body language to know that they're like interested and engaged in what we're saying or what we're hearing, that kind of makes us rush through phone calls more than we are likely to rush through an in-person or a Zoom. So again, I think it's just even more important that you like have your strategic questions in front of you, have your outcome, know that you have permission. And when you get on that call to just reaffirm, like, just want to make sure you still have 30 minutes for this call. And so you feel good that you have permission to take that time. So you don't feel like you have to be like, oh, I'll let you go. Right. So just a thought.
Thanks, Laurel. So just again, a reminder, if you have questions, please type them into the chat, type them into the Q&A. We have one other question that came in earlier that we'll get to in a second, but, and of course, three of us can ramble on about whatever, but it'll be better if you guys have questions and you guys have, if there's things that we can specifically talk to that are of interest to you. And it doesn't even have to be a specific question. It could just be, what are your thoughts on fill-in?
A topic.
Yeah, because we have thoughts if we have anything at the Osborne Group. So we have another question that came in earlier, and that question is, how can I encourage advancement leadership to want to ask for board member recommendations based on prospect research rather than mostly recommendations by existing board members of their friends and colleagues?
So that's a very rich question because there are lots of parts to it. I saw that you are in charge of prospect research, that's your position. So part of it is going to be your managing up skills. I think also that you don't want to just say, I'm going to tackle, get the board to do this. If you have some wonderful potential board members, if you've researched and you've got some really good people, who on your team staffs the governance committee or the nominating committee? Take your wonderful people to that person who staffs them and say, I have 5 people that I think are awesome, and do it in plenty of time before the meeting, because maybe they don't know all of them. Maybe they haven't been in touch with all of them. They have to see who knows them, who doesn't know them. They could add stuff to the profile that's richer and better. And now, instead of saying, we don't want you to do this, we don't want you asking your friends, or that you're doing something wrong, board, you're saying, look, I have gifts. I have gifts. So that's the strategy I would use.
Yeah, I just to piggyback on that, I always go back to the kind of what's in it for me equation. And when you're working with your colleagues who are managing the board, when you're working with the board itself, I think always trying to think about what their pain points are, what are the things that they're being challenged with, and what are their goals. And so when you think about why ultimately we want to use prospect research instead of having board members ask their friends, there's a lot of really important reasons why we do that, right? Because it, maybe a pain point is that we feel like we're not reaching outside of the same set of circles. Well, it's because our board members just keep asking their friends and they all have the same circle. So if that's a pain point for the board and for the people managing the board, then that's a great time to say, actually, to Karen's point, I've got a list of people who are outside of these circles. Or if you know that there are diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that are happening, and there are staff members who have goals around that, again, another way to say, I can come in and help you achieve those goals because I've got this set of people that have been researched that we can go, start to cultivate and engage. So look at I think it's really important to sit down with everybody and get a really clear sense of what are we trying to accomplish with this board? What's this board's purpose? And what are our pain points around this board? And how is prospect research helping us to soothe some of those pain points?
Yeah, I had a similar thought, Laurel. My first thought in seeing this question was around integration and not seeing the nominating process as separate from your pipeline and from the gift work that you're doing otherwise. And I think when those are all well integrated, then, you know, then board candidates who are not just friends and family, you know, tend to bubble up. And I also think it's more likely in those situations too, when you have goals and you have understandings, that you'll have the procedures and strategic sense of what you want your board to look like and how it functions, because you have set goals that you're trying to reach. It's all integrated together, and then there's clarity about who you're looking for. And if the board member's friends or colleagues fit that profile, then fantastic. But if they don't, then there's an understanding throughout the organization that even if you are looking to friends and family, that they still have to fit this profile.
It sounds like, don't both of you think that it sounds like this organization doesn't have that? Because if all there isn't a formal procedure or a formal, and you can really lead from any seat. I just want to add that. So as the head of prospect research, if you investigate what Bob said, you know, is there a goal? Is there something that they're looking for? Like Laurel said, is there a pain point? And you can't find answers because people haven't thought that all out. Then just lead with some questions. You know, lead with some questions. How are we thinking about this? I would like to be as helpful to you as possible and for you to be as successful as you could possibly be. And I was wondering what your thoughts are about how this board should look and what are our goals and what's the vision. You know, you can bubble up the right questions and get people thinking about what they ought to be doing. So just one other thought.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I do think sometimes people can have some level of integration, and the board still thinks it's their job to go out and ask their friends. You know, I was talking to at least one meeting about that this week. So
Yes.
I have a question for you guys that's board related. So I've joined two boards during the pandemic for various reasons. And then you and I, Laurel, were talking to a friend of the firm recently, and he was wondering, you know, are we going to see more board meetings purely by Zoom? And, you know, and what I would have certainly 2 years ago thought would be a major step backwards as far as board meetings go, because I do believe in, you know, I certainly then believed in person as much as possible. But wondering if you guys, what your thoughts are on that, and if anything has changed and you're thinking about the desirability of Zoom board meetings now and going forward.
I think they're here to stay. So I belong on two boards. I joined two boards during the pandemic as well, Bob. Must have been something. And so, but I just 2 days ago, I just facilitated a board meeting of a client. And 50% were on Zoom and 50% were in person. And they were trying to get, you know, people to be in person, but there was a good number of them. One said, you know, he had a newborn and he could be on holding his newborn on the Zoom, but he can't be physically there with the newborn. And everyone had a reason who chose to be on Zoom. So we conducted not only a board meeting, but we conducted a training on 50% and 50%. And thinking about it, I had to make sure that it was as engaging for the Zoom people as it was for the in-person people, and that it was as connected. So I think that you're going to always have, from now on, some percentage of your board members wanting to call in for whatever reason. They used to do it on phone. Remember, we used to put a phone in the middle of the conference room and push the receiver, and then, can you hear us? Could you move the microphone? And I think now Zoom is better than that. It's way better than that. And you can see if they're doing their mail, which you couldn't do when we had the conference call. So I think you have to be prepared for, how am I going to keep them engaged? How am I going to keep them connected? How are we going to have social time? What are all the pieces that make a board work well together and a meeting go well together? And can we do it in this hybrid way?
Yeah, I agree with everything Karen just said. I would just kind of emphasize, it just makes us, the pre-work and the thinking through how we're going to do things, even more important. We can't rely on kind of covering our bases once we're all in the room together. We have to be able to understand, which of these things on the agenda might be really tough for people to talk about. Do I need to call people ahead of time and have some one-on-one conversations? Does the board chair need to reach out to some folks to see how they're feeling? It just requires more kind of outside the board meeting, I think, preparation and follow through and checking in. And then Anne just said what I was going to say, which is, again, as we're looking at diversifying and we're looking at bringing more new voices to the table, Zoom is an option, right? It's one more way that we're making our work more accessible to people who can't track me. And we work with plenty of organizations that are state-based, that are nationwide, and the ability to not make people travel really long distances. I mean, I know we 2 years ago would have said, no, if people are committed, they should travel, right? But I think as we think about diversifying our boards and bringing new voices to the table, I think, again, this is just one of our tools in our toolkit to help people do that.
Yeah. And, one last thought, it's a little tangential to the question, but I just think it's so important, is that our board meetings are engaging. And that means you've got to engage no matter whether everybody's in the room, everybody's on Zoom, or you have a hybrid. If we are just reading reports, if we are just listening to the CEO, the head of school, the president, make a long report, and then the head of this committee, and then the head of that committee, it doesn't matter whether you're in person, on Zoom, or on the phone, you're boring the heck out of people, and they're not going to show up, even though you've made it easier to show up. Or they're going to show up, but they're going to be distracted and doing something else. So please think about, how are we running our board meetings so that they are engaging, I'm looking forward to attending this board meeting, because that's how, we all serve. And we're busy, you're busy, all of your board members are busy. Make those board meetings worthwhile. Make them be something that I want to participate in, and I believe I have something to offer.
Yeah, I think those are great answers. And for me, it was a genuine question, because it is something I'm sort of wrestling with. But I think both of you raised really good points. And I think I've been thinking about it I've never met any of these people in person. And then with this other board, I've met them once. And that's definitely been a stronger experience. The people that I've met one time at least. But I think you're right, because we've been doing strategic planning online for 2 years. And the strategic planning I've been doing has been very engaging and very successful. And it's been all online, something that I would have predicted going in would be potentially, a nightmare, because strategic planning is difficult. You never know where things are going to go and how it's going to, and it's been very successful on Zoom, I think, because it did force us to think about, how are we going to make this engaging? How are we going to get the information that we need in a way that's going to engage everyone and not be 3 hours of torture every month for people for 6 months, And so we really thought about, how do we structure this? And I think that's exactly the right way to think about a board meeting. It's just, I think you're right. It's not taking the way we did it, which should have hopefully been engaging anyway, but just moving that over into Zoom, because even an engaging board meeting, in person may not be as engaging on Zoom. And we do have to think about what does the change in medium mean in terms of engagement?
Yeah.
But I think we'll have to leave it there because we're at the end of our time, and I have a Zoom coming on after this. I'm sure many of you have a Zoom as well. So thanks again for joining us for Ask Us Anything. We look forward to seeing you in March. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.